Imagine the army of Ragnar Lothbrok bound for Paris gets pulled into a time vortex. Their 120 ships and 10,000 warriors emerge from the fog along the River Seine, but something's off. They've traveled 700 years back to the Roman Empire's peak. The Vikings aren't sailing to modern Paris anymore. They're approaching Old Lutetia, the city's ancient Roman stronghold, where the two legendary forces will clash. Join us for History Unfolded, Romans versus Vikings. The outcome of the coming battle hinges on two main points: location and preparedness for battle. The Vikings are masters of rapid hit-and-run tactics, using their longships and speed as advantages for pillaging and raiding. But Ragnar has amassed 10,000 men, an army eager to plunder and sack the city of Paris for all its gold and riches. What they aren't expecting to find, however, is Camp de Mars, an 8,000-man Roman garrison of hardened veteran soldiers, used to excursions with Gallic and German barbarians. As the clock ticks on, the timelines diverge, and two outcomes present themselves to us. Now let's pause the scenario and take a look at the armies and how they're stacked, beginning with the Vikings. The Viking Heer, or Viking army, is led by the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. These men were high on morale and perhaps even some other substances, itching to get their hands on some plunder. It may surprise you to know that the Vikings weren't all outfitted the same. It was your income that would determine what you wore and used in battle. Your average income Viking would have used leather armor, axes, and wooden shields with metal trim. Poor warriors didn't wear much armor and carried spears or sea axes. Wealthy warriors were the ones that would wear chainmail armor, carry swords and battle axes, and use metal shields of high quality. As most warriors weren't wealthy, we can assume 6,000 warriors to be of the average and poor class, and 2,000 to be of the wealthy class. They tended to field a few archers and cavalry as well, but mainly fielded infantry. Let's not forget that among these warriors would be the legendary wolfcoats and berserkers, elite Viking warriors whose ferocity and battle frenzies were the stuff of legend and incredibly demoralizing to most foes who faced them. Now on to the Roman side, where the differences are stark. Rome fielded professional standing armies and were outfitted with the same armor and weaponry. The garrison is 8,000 men strong, and the main forces were the legions, heavy infantry who wore interlocking steel plates on their upper bodies, leather or iron helmets, and full-body wooden rectangular shields with iron edging. This allowed for complex battle tactics and formations like the testudo or tortoise, a formation where soldiers linked their shields together to protect themselves from arrow fire from practically every direction, making them nearly impervious to attack. As for weaponry, a legionary would have throwing javelins as primary weapons for ranged attack, and short swords for close combat. The Romans also used auxiliaries, cavalry, archers, and siege equipment, which they used extensively in battle, often utilizing them to great effect before even engaging with their enemy. Now let's press play and soar over to the coming battlefield, where in our first scenario the alarm bells are rung and the Roman garrison amasses. It takes only an hour for the legion to be prepared and outfitted. The Romans march from their garrison, swiftly advancing towards the Vikings, who still think they have the element of surprise and are still making preparations for the siege of Paris. Viking scouts spot the approaching dust plume, a telltale sign that an army is advancing. Ragnar Lothbrok is somewhat perplexed that the French knew he was coming, but he's confident in his army and rallies his troops to form up and march to face what he assumes is a small force of French troops. As they meet on the field of battle, a different sight meets the Vikings. Glimmering formations of thousands of shields and hundreds of horses, as well as an assortment of siege engines, are arrayed against the Vikings. The Vikings outnumber the Romans, however, and move to set up their attack. The Vikings form into their classic wedge shield formations, now eager to attack the surprise army in front of them. As they rush forward, their lines of archers begin raining arrows down on the Romans. The Romans form into their signature testudo, and the majority of the arrows rain harmlessly down onto the disciplined formations. Undeterred, the Viking shield wall continues to advance. However, having had ample time to prepare, the Romans launch a volley of flaming arrows, scorpio bolts, and massive stones into the Vikings. For the most part, normal arrows fly true and cause a number of casualties amongst the Vikings, with the massive weight of the siege weaponry ripping through some formations. The Vikings are closing now as they approach the legions. They know their greatest advantage is in their skilled close combat, and they begin charging eagerly at the Romans. Just before they reach their targets, however, their charge is interrupted as the Romans throw their first volley of pilum or javelins with barbed edges. Thousands of pilum fly into the air and come raining down onto the waiting Viking shields. The Vikings roar in defiance as their shields defend them, but falter just before they they reach the Romans as they realize they can't unstick the pilum from their shields, and now their shields are rendered useless. The Vikings begin to discard their shields hastily, but as they do so, the second and third volley of pilum are thrown and find their mark in hundreds of dead Vikings. The Romans, now out of ranged weaponry, begin to steadily march forward, drawing their swords, ready to engage the Vikings. Thousands of men clash with one another. Shouts and dust fill the air as they fight a bloody battle. Ragnar watches on, biding his time, but then his choices are further limited by the arrival of the Roman cavalry. Hundreds of horses were waiting for this exact moment, and the Viking troops who are now committed to the fight have few shields remaining and no defense along their flanks. The cavalry wade into the Vikings, absolutely slaughtering them as the Vikings enter disarray. They have trouble finding a weakness in the shield walls of the Romans, who advance relentlessly, hacking anyone who gets close. As the front lines of the Romans tire, another line moves forward to take their place, a seemingly tireless and endless advance of lookalike soldiers. This was not a fight Ragnar was ready for, nor one he could win. Realizing his mistake, Ragnar sounds the retreat back to the boats, preserving as many of his forces as he can. What was supposed to be a time of pillaging had turned into a time of slaughter. The Vikings are thoroughly demoralized and are routed. The Romans would pursue the Vikings. However, the Vikings are masters of hit-and-run tactics, making their speed and agility much higher than that of the heavily armored Romans. Nearly half of the Viking lines are lost, and the rest retreat hastily to their ships, with Ragnar left to wonder just who he had faced. Just as he closes his eyes, a strange breeze blows, and he finds himself once more sailing towards Paris, his entire army present and intact. Was it a dream, or was this destiny giving him a second chance? Ragnar had no idea who those people were that had come from the direction of Paris, but he knew that an unprepared army was a dead army in the face of a Viking horde. Instead of stopping to make camp along the shore, Ragnar orders the entire fleet to make ready for battle. The fog grants the Vikings further cover as they stealthily sneak closer and closer to the still sleeping garrison of Romans, the early morning dark concealing them. Scouts move ahead and spy out the location of the garrison, and Ragnar prepares. They make landfall quietly and surround the garrison. A Roman scout spots the Vikings, but it's too late. The alarm is sounded, and a deafening roar goes up around the Romans. The Romans are disciplined, but still human. A panic ensues, and what would usually be an organized muster turns into chaos. Individual Romans know to don their gear as soon as an alarm sounds, but the Vikings are prepared. They lay siege to the garrison. This is just a clever ruse by the Vikings, who are trying to draw the Romans into a trap. The Romans, having hastily gathered and angry at the surprise attack, seem to be fighting the Vikings off successfully. This new surge of confidence causes the Romans to leave the garrison and pursue the Vikings, and once the bulk of their forces are arrayed, that's when the trap is sprung. Ragnar and his elite forces, alongside his 10,000-strong army, execute a surprise pincer maneuver, with the Vikings surrounding the Romans, who expected to fight a much smaller force. The Romans don't have time to adapt and use their formations to their fullest extent, and when facing the ferocity of the berserkers and the superior armor and shield walls of the Vikings, the Romans are pushed back, and a foothold is gained into the garrison. They break through swiftly, attacking anyone in sight, and lay waste to the fortification. The Vikings, in their battle lust and fury, absolutely massacre the Romans, who don't stand a chance against the superior numbers without their formations and tactics. The Vikings use their mastery of confusion and hit-and-run tactics, and Ragnar Lothbrok wins the day. And that brings us to the end of our versus video. The success of a battle depends on intelligence, tactics used in the deployment of armies, but as we can see, when either army is at their most advantageous, they truly become a force to be reckoned with. We hope you enjoyed the video, and if you'd like to see more epic videos like this one, give us a like and subscribe. Comment down below if there's another battle you'd like to see, and we'll make it happen. See you in the next one.